You are listening to the People Centric Podcast, where we talk through the toughest challenges that people face at work and give practical advice to fixing those challenges. Thanks for joining our movement to create workplaces that are happier, healthier, aligned, and empowered by putting people at the center of all that we do.
Hey, People Centric leaders. This is Stephanie Anderson from the People Centric team. So great to have you here on the podcast today. I am joined by some of my wonderful, wonderful colleagues who I will introduce just here in a second. But today, our topic is Serenity Now, which, if you are a classic TV fan, you got that joke. If not, check out Seinfeld sometimes. And I'm being given a note that classic TV might have been an insulting phrase for those of you who are older. So my apologies.
Like Nick at Night. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine.
It's officially, it's officially in its reruns phase. It's what's on at 10 o'clock at night when everything else ends. But we love Seinfeld. But anyhow, we were talking about this idea of like when should you just let something go? So recently I came across this psychological theory while, surfing the World Wide Web. So there's my age for you. But of like this theory of like, when should you just let something go? When should you let them quote? And so this woman told a story of like a time when somebody she didn't really know, she had a conversation with them, and then another friend ended up telling her, hey, actually you ended up upsetting her, or that offended her in some way. And she's like, well, should I reach out to her? And she's like, no, you shouldn't. Like, just let her. You guys aren't friends. There isn't a deep relationship there. Like, you don't need to do that. And then the woman was saying like how challenging that was for her just to like let that thing go, because again, without going deeply into the story, the other woman had really misunderstood her, had taken something out of context, and essentially was kind of wrong about who she was and what her intention was, her motives were in that moment. And so when should you just let something go, or when should you lean in and have conversations? And so we're going to jump into this today and talk about when you should let it go, when you should just let them. And so with us today, you've already heard Diana Royalty.
Hi. Hi, guys.
We've got Bethany Taff.
Hello. I'm here today. I forgot my mic, so hopefully you guys can hear me okay.
I think we can hear you well. So, and then Philip Herzog is here too.
Hello. I will say, to really get Seinfeld, you have to say it the way the Seinfeld show says it, which is Serenity now! Serenity now! That's what I was saying.
I was trying not to shout at people, but there you go.
It's not very serene the way they do it, It's very anti-serenity.
We can all appreciate that. When you need serenity the most is when you probably sound the least calm in asking for it.
Yeah. Well, on that point, why are we joking about serenity now? Like, why is this so hard? Like, when somebody is wrong, like about something, or they're wrong about us, or they've misjudged our intentions, or we don't like how they're doing something, like, why is it hard to let it go?
Well, some of us, I'm not going to point any fingers or name any names, but some of us are control freak perfectionists. Okay. And that's where we're at. And sometimes when people care about things, you feel like you have to do it the way that it's supposed to be done, or the right way, or like the process or whatever. Even if these people are probably going to get the same outcome, if they're not doing exactly the way that you're doing it, they're doing it wrong. And so, maybe sometimes that happens to some people. I don't know. Not me.
Yeah, never you. Never you.
Not me.
I don't think anybody could relate to that. Weird. Also, if it is personal, then it feels like, okay, well, I have to defend myself because I don't want people to have a wrong idea about me, or I don't want to lose credibility in a certain space or situation. And so it's really, I think that's another side of it too.
Yeah, like I think that's probably the hardest one for me. Like it's a little bit easy for me to like let things go, like small stuff, because I'm like, I just don't want to die on that hill. But if it feels like someone has misjudged me, or like my intentions or motivation for doing something, like that's a hard one for me to let go and have.
I think the question I usually a check for me when I hear that, because I'm also a systematize process person, so I like things to go really well and also make everyone feel great. But there have been many times where something has happened, right? Whether it's how someone communicated or an outcome, something I handed off that I thought would be done that wasn't done, or something I failed in and how someone responded to me in that, like many reasons, examples. But what challenged my response was the question I think I was asking myself about them is, don't you know who I am? Like, don't you know who I am? Of course, I didn't make that dumb mistake on purpose. Or don't you know who I am? I would not have wanted you to do it this way. I would have wanted you to do it this way. Or how dare you talk to me that way? I am also an important, interesting, intelligent human being, right? And I think some of it can be almost identity based. And most of the time, at least if my circles, that's not really ever how people meant it. No one has ever told me professionally I'm stupid or not worth time or that I'm a huge failure and won't ever amount to anything, right? But I think that offense that pops in sometimes is that, right? Or they don't say, I don't care about this project. Usually it's just a lot of other things are happening. And so if they're not doing the thing I would have done, it doesn't mean it's a thought about me at all. Usually it's they have their own thoughts about something else, which I think is why it matters so much how you approach this. And if you get distracted by that, it becomes personal instead of instructional or coaching or something that you can develop from.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I like that you started bringing work into this, Philip, of like, how does this show up for us at work? And maybe what are some examples of where like this is hard specifically in a work environment? Because I think all of us agree, like in personal relationships or interpersonally, like I think everybody kind of gets that and feels that way. But like, what are some of the work things that we hear or see come up? And maybe even in our role, outside looking in as consultants on a team, of when have we seen people struggle to let it go?
Oh man, I think letting it go is one of the hardest things ever, right? Because like I was saying, people care at work, and that's the crux of it. They care. Um, but I think it shows up when people start assigning intent to the things that are happening around them, right? Like, I don't know. I'm a very like curt email writer. I don't do a lot of fluff. I'm just like very direct. And so people have sometimes been like, "Were you mad? Are you mad at me?" Or "Why are you so mean?"
Why
Or,
didn't you use any exclamation points in your email to me, Diana? Are you
there
mad?
was no emojis.
What's wrong with you?
What's wrong with you? Yeah. So, like, I think that people assign intent to that when my intent was zero intent, right? I just typed the email. I was not thinking about how it sounded. I was not thinking of, I was just answering whatever needed to be answered. And so I think there are moments where people assign intent to the words or actions of others around them. And then it starts to create these stories that we then have to feel like we have to address or fix.
Yeah, that's such a perfect example, and one we hear often, is like that communication, and like especially when it's over email or text. Like we've heard this from so many people. So the story I'm about to tell, if you think it's about you, it's probably not, because we've just heard it a lot of like, oh yeah, like I supervisor, manager, leader have a real problem with this person on my team because how they email people is really inappropriate, unprofessional. Like we've just heard it all. And then when we start digging into it, typically that person has not said anything like truly inappropriate, or they've not been maybe unprofessional, but like, was their communication like overly warm, or like, oh yeah, they started the email with, how was your day? And blah, blah, blah. And I hope you had a good weekend. Like, I think those are things that some of us do as a normal part of our communication. And then other people get to the point. And so it's almost funny at this point how often we hear that from leaders of like, I've got a real problem with somebody on my team because they're not nice to people. We're like, well, how are they not nice to people? Well, they send their emails like this. And then we have to kind of be like, ooh, maybe you should let that go. Like, how much does that really matter? And I think it's okay for people to have different communication styles. Yeah. Bethany, I think you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was thinking like one way that I've seen this where it becomes an issue too is like for a person who maybe there is some kind of offense towards them, and they think, and they start to, like Diana said, like start to create a story about, okay, this is what everybody thinks about me, or this is what always. And the problem that I see sometimes when people kind of like in coaching situations is when people start to kind of spiral and they're thinking more about that thing than anything else. They're not even thinking about the work. They're just fixated on this offense or this thing that was said to them maybe one time, or something that maybe they misinterpreted or whatever, and they start to take it really personally, and they're so fixated on it they can't actually like be effective in their work anymore, instead of letting it go and moving on. And so I think that's a mistake that I see with this sometimes, where it's like, okay, instead of getting so fixated on and starting to spiral, you don't even always have to address it. Or maybe you address it once and then you say, okay, I'm going to move forward. I don't have to continue to defend myself. I'm going to just prove that I can do my job well. And that's the thing that you need to focus on, which is really hard to be able to say, especially if you do feel like you have a lot of, I don't know, like really good reasons just why something didn't work the way that it should have worked, or whatever it was. Like, you may have a lot of really good reasons, but it's not always worth it to go and continue to like argue those points with people. Just show people that you can do the job. I think sometimes that's a mistake that I see too.
It's super interesting that you say that, because I think today's topic isn't necessarily conflict management in a way. It's almost like the internal pre-conflict management. Like, is it a conflict if you're okay? And so there is a time and a place if there's, habits and things that are bad and it's hurting the team. Like, yes. And we talk about that a lot too. But Bethany, to your point, it's this internal pause almost of like, is my story accurate? Am I coming at this the right way? Is it as big a deal as I'm making it? Is it really about me, or is it about something else? And if that something else isn't super significant, you don't need to keep wasting time and energy on it, and go keep doing good work.
Yeah, I'll share something that a mentor of mine told me one time, because you guys have all heard I'm a little stoic, I'm a little cold, I'm a little mean, all of those things, right? They're all true. But
not all true, but
but I struggled with it in the early parts of my career, because I was like, I don't want to be seen as the mean person, right? I don't want to be seen as that. I don't want that story out there. I genuinely do care. It's just I don't show it a lot. And so she said to me, one of the best pieces of advice I've ever gotten. She said, letting people be wrong about you while keeping your inner peace is the ultimate power move. And so I had to sort of,
oh, that's good.
Right? I had to figure out how do I let people be wrong about me, but me keep my inner peace, because their opinion of me is not my business, right? Like, can I do things to maybe change their opinion of me? Sure. Is it necessary or worth it? Most of the time, probably not. Like, it's okay. It's okay for people to think what they want to think about you. And you just have to keep your inner peace and keep doing the good job and keep doing what you know is right, because honestly, your intent is not to be mean. I don't think anyone's intent is to be mean or intent to be hard-nosed or cutthroat or any of those things, right? Like, I think it's just a story that is written by you, by other people, and you have to find a way to let all of that go and keep your inner peace and just keep doing the job that you know you're supposed to do.
Yeah. And that's super hard to do. As like president of the Recovering People Pleasers Club. It's very that's really hard for me to do. It's like, let people be wrong about you. Or just to like, let them think what they think. And I think, the truth for me that I have had to accept in that is that like, I might not even be right. Like I might be projecting just my insecurity about something, or my fear or my imposter syndrome onto that person because of how they responded to something, that I'm like, oh my gosh, they see it. Like they see that I'm a fraud, or I don't know how to do that. And the reality is, like, I could be completely wrong. They may never think that. And kind of to what Bethany and Philip were saying, of like how much mental energy we waste and we don't realize, and how much anxiety we create for ourselves when we start writing these stories about what other people think of us that may not even be true. Or maybe we do know they're true because that person said it to us and told us to our face they think this. But yeah, it just like, let it go. Like, does that really matter? And I think especially as a leader, you have to think about, like, does me being kind of stuck in this paradigm help me? Does it help our team? Does it help us work toward the goals that we want to accomplish? And is that really a barrier to us accomplishing our goal? If this person doesn't like me, or we don't agree on this, is that actually a barrier? Because I think a lot of times we're just looking for harmony, and we're not always going to achieve harmony. Like sometimes we are going to disagree, and sometimes not everyone on the team is going to see the same thing the same way. And that's okay. It doesn't have to be a barrier to our success as a team or an organization or as an individual. But I think a lot of times we make like a mountain out of a molehill, and we allow that to become a barrier to us completing something or getting good work done.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I wondered too if, like, because I feel like we've talked a lot about for just like the employees, but I wonder if we could kind of dive into for leaders too. What does it look like to just let them, whenever you're thinking about your teams too?
I have heard from many leaders we talk with. I think as we're talking, whatever the decision is, it could be about strategic planning or creating new initiatives, or how we're going to use our budget, to what kind of new marketing crews are we going to, like anything, any industry. Many times I hear them talking, and then they'll make a statement that actually shows that internal struggle. Well, what will the team think? And the ... I don't think is always even just about this idea or this new thing, but what will the team think about me? And that you should be aware of that as a team leader. Definitely, like, relationship is a key component of being a great leader. But when that replaces their thoughts about me as an individual, replace how good and healthy is this for our team and for our organization, then you've misplaced, I would say, the order of what values should be, and what is healthiest. But a lot of people get caught up on that because it is, again, we always say business is personal. So I think helping people filter out, the personal will always be there and should be there, but what's first and what's primary. And so I think a lot of times we try to help people see that, yes, like, these decisions will impact your team. And for some people, it might even impact what they think of you, especially in the short term. But I think we also see deep down, people fundamentally are good, and I think want to rebuild relationship. And so that's why we talk about intent and building trust and the well before you need it, because it helps in the times when you are a leader and you have to be unpopular. Over time, trust and quality relationship for values that are shared trumps how much someone likes you in the moment for a couple decisions you're making.
So true. I love that. Yeah, and I was thinking about how I went about like changing how I do things so that I could keep my inner peace and not worry about it as much. And really, it was all about the communication. It turned into, how do I communicate what I'm thinking so that people don't randomly assign intent to me and don't think these things of me, so that people know what I'm thinking. And I think when I started just better communication, more transparency, more vulnerability, all of those things, it kind of changed how people saw my decisions, and it changed how people saw how I interacted. And they were kind of like, oh, yes, Diana's stoic, but she totally cares. And here's why she's doing this. And if we have questions, we can go to her. And it just sort of shifted the way people talked about me and the way people spoke about me. So then I didn't have to spend so much energy worrying about it. It was more of just if I explain myself and if I communicate better, then the intent part goes away. The assigning stuff goes away.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. one thing I was thinking with this is one way that we see it too with leaders is a lot of times whenever we have a leader who really wants to create more engagement on their team. And so they're trying to think, okay, how do I create more engagement? And so a lot of times our answer is literally engage them. And so it's just going to them and like trusting them to make decisions and to like be a part of the process, and something that you probably could do as a leader in 10 minutes, even if you know all the buttons to push and what moves to make and all of that. Instead, pulling your team in and saying like, okay, here's the problem that we're trying to solve for. I would love it if you guys could get together and figure this out. And so whenever you do that, though, as a leader, it can be really, really hard, because what their team might bring back to you may not be the answer that you were hoping they would get to, at least not at first. And so I think this is an area where whenever it's a little bit of a different direction, but like for leaders, just sometimes you just have to let them. Sometimes they're going to do things or make decisions or take longer to get to the decision that you want them to get to. And it's okay. Sometimes you just have to let them, because that's how people grow and develop and engage and all of these different things. And so it's being able to figure out like how do you step back as a leader and say like, oh, okay, and like ask more questions, even if it's not what you were expecting or hoping for, and to not just get mad or to go say, oh, I'll just do it. And to just say like, okay, well, tell me about how you guys made that decision, or like what questions do you have, or is this going to help you solve the problem that you were initially hoping to solve? Did you guys think about this or this or this? And so just kind of helping guide your team that way, and just letting them kind of explore that process of decision making or problem solving and things like that, which can be, I think, a really, really big challenge. I would say this is something when we're talking about this, like we talk about Don, and just his strengths a lot. I think he's really good at this for both our team, but also whenever we're working with clients, I see this a lot too, where we're having conversations maybe with the team and they start maybe talking about something, or they say something that I'm like, especially like when I first started and was training a lot, of just kind of watching Don, and I would see him not address something that I was like, why are we not addressing that thing? Like, shouldn't we like skate towards that really hard? And he doesn't always, but it's, I think, out of a lot of wisdom and just experience of knowing, okay, we're just going to we're going to like drive past that a little bit. It's not that we're never going to address it. It's just that we don't have to right now. We'll get back to it. And so right now, let's focus on the bigger picture. And eventually, like, that thing is probably going to come back around, and we can focus on it in a more, in a better environment and a better setting. So that's sort of what I think about whenever I think about how leaders should just sort of let them.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of like, I think a lot of leaders like will pounce on everything that they see the team doing differently than they might, or if they see the team working toward a different answer than what they thought. Because I think sometimes the hard truth that we have to admit is sometimes we only delegate things when we've already solved it, because then we know, like, we almost do it as a weird form of contingency planning of like, well, I'm going to give this to the team, but I already know the answer and I already know what we should do. So that way, in case they start doing it the wrong way, like I can jump in and intervene. And that's just not really the right approach. Like, what does your team learn if you jump in and control every part, right? Like, how does your team grow? And how do you know what they're actually capable of unless you actually let them try new things? And it's also putting your ego aside as a leader and saying, like, my way may not be the only right way to do this. The answer that I came up may not be the only right answer for our business. And that sometimes, yeah, we need to let people go down different paths or talk about different ideas. And even if we know that maybe like, oh, that's really not the right thing, or they're getting off topic or off trail, I think sometimes like we jump in too quick, and then we don't let people like get there themselves. And then again, they don't learn. They don't learn how to do those things. They don't learn how to build those new skills. And we all went through that at some point. To build the skills and experience that you have, you had to go down a lot of different paths and ways. It's just our memory doesn't remember that. We just remember when we found the right way to do it. And I think sometimes forget that as leaders. And when we're having conversations with our team, we jump in a little too fast, or like we only delegate the things that we know. Oh yeah, like I could jump in and save this, or we control the process way too much to not let people like explore different ideas and thoughts. And it's one thing that we talk a lot about with teams, that where there's a lot of harmony on a team, it can feel really good because there's not a lot of disagreements, but that's typically also a team that might accomplish less. And sometimes a team that disagrees more and actually has more conflict, yeah, it may feel a little more uncomfortable sometimes, but that's a team that typically accomplishes a lot more because they're looking at things a lot of different ways. They're willing to go down different paths or see different perspectives on this. So
an example I was thinking of just in my career prior to People Centric, and I think we still do lots of work. It's just a muscle I guess I've built over time. I used to do lots of writing in different settings. So writing press releases for organizations, or writing specific letters, and really carefully worded language to articulate what's happening, and in a short amount of time. And these things would often be passed around like massive amounts of people who would have ideas or critiques, and also then shape my beautifully written letter. And I care about every word I choose. And early on, it was very painful to have that, because you're like, whoa, what you're saying is my words weren't good enough for you. Anonymous reader number 12, but I actually knew who they were, so it made it worse. But in the end, it actually was better. My words are much better when they're filtered through multiple people, because I'm not my own audience. And so I think that's kind of an example of just how some of this plays out too. Like, you should get that insight and help. But Stephanie and Bethany, to your point, there's a quote I came across this week that I think perfectly articulates, if your goal as a leader is to develop people, what that looks like. And the quote essentially says, usually a half-baked idea from the person you're coaching or your team, a half-baked idea is better than a fully baked idea from you. And that is exactly what we're talking about.
That's good. I have one last thing before we wrap up too, because I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking about like leaders who are thinking, they're listening to us and thinking like, they're just telling me to let my team like do whatever they want to. Just let them run wild and make stupid decisions all the time. And like, what if it just completely derails our productivity or our organization or our finances or whatever? And so I guess that's a question. And I'm thinking about Diana too, because I know that she's very executive minded. So I'm wondering if you have some thoughts on this specifically, of like, how do you make sure your team, how do you let them, but then also like make sure they're not like off the rails,
Yeah. And I'm a big, like, I'm a control freak. And so, yeah, when I give projects to people, I do want to check in on them. I do want to know they're going down the right path. I do want to make sure that we're thinking about all the things that I know and have in my head that, we tried 10 times and failed, and all of these, right? I do want that. So I think one of the best things you can do is just tell your team the things that have tried and things that have failed in the past, and kind of share your vision, but let them take it. Let them do the work on it and create what's going to be good for them and how they're going to use it, and trust them, which is really hard. Trust them that they're going to do a good job and that it's going to be done right. And the other thing is, you have to remember that nothing is permanent, right? You can go back and fix anything. You can go back and change things. You can go back and adjust things. So there's no like, this is not going to be the forever and ever, right? It's going to change over time, and then you can always fix stuff and you can check and adjust. So I'm a big fan of the set the vision up front, tell them the things in your head, let them run, and then check and adjust later. I think that check and adjust part people forget about. It's that like, you can go back 6 months from now and make sure it's working the way you want it to work. And so I love that too. But yeah, it's not free reign. It's just freedom, right? It's guardrails to act, not maps to act. It's just these, you have a space.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Diana. Because Bethany, you brought up a great point of like, yeah, we're not endorsing just like let everybody run wild and loose and free and see what happens. And it could be cool. I mean, I'm a little more apt to that, but that's probably just more my leadership style. But yeah, I think it is. I loved what the tips that you gave there, Diana, of like, yeah, like check in on the process and that nothing is permanent. Like there's very few things that you can't undo when you're working on something. And especially like if we're working ahead on a project, like we can always go back and change different things. And I think that's a good part of just like good, even contingency planning is understanding that like how we think it's going to go is probably never how it will actually go. And so we just need to be prepared to change course and do stuff like that. And I think that's a part of the like letting it go too, is just accepting that even the way you've planned it out is probably not how it's actually going to happen. And so if we can all get a little more comfortable with like holding things loosely. So well, this has been an awesome conversation. Thanks everybody for sharing your thoughts. I thought I would end us with a quote from the article I read at the beginning. And again, this is maybe a little bit of a therapy moment for those of us who struggle with control, which I really think is everyone, but some of us are just more open about it. Of like, how do you release the control? How do you experience inner peace? So here's the quote from that article. It says, the fastest way to take control of your life is to stop controlling everyone around you. By letting go of the things we can't control, we become free to focus our attention on the things within our control. Trying to control someone else's texting or email patterns or political beliefs will likely drive you nuts. But instead, by focusing on your own decisions, your thoughts, what you choose to eat, wear, say, do, will lead to a greater sense of inner peace. So,
Yep. Agreed.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today on the People Centric Podcast. We hope this was a helpful topic for you just to do a little introspecting and dive into this today, or maybe this is something you're struggling with on your team. So reach out to us, ask us more questions if this is a topic that you want to talk more about. And as well, always feel free to send a topic our way. If there's something you'd love to hear us discuss, you can get all of our info on how to reach out to us in the podcast. But thanks for being here today, and we hope you have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the People Centric Podcast. We are so grateful for you joining us every week. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. Also, feel free to share on your social media with everyone that you know. It really does help us. If you would like to contact us, I have put our information in the show notes. Please reach out anytime. We love hearing from you. We will be back next week with a new topic. Until then, be well and lead well.